So I think the biggest connection between what I generally refer to as spirituality and physics can be found in the discipline of M theory. M theory posits that everything in the physical universe, everything that we see with our senses, is actually being created from another source, if you will. And this other source, in terms of M theory's view of things, is pure energy and two-dimensional. And if you look into the teachings of what I call experiential spirituality, you will see that most of them refer to a reality beyond the physical that is pure energy and which creates the physical universe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Joseph Selbie with us on the show today. Joseph is an author who's known for explaining connections between modern-day science and the timeless experience-based discoveries of the mystics. Some of the questions I'll be asking him are, does God exist? And can we prove that scientifically? Is heaven a hologram? And do we all have the ability to create miracles? Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go chat with Joseph. Joseph, what a delight to have you with us today. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.
You are most welcome. When it comes to God and transcendent phenomena, are saints, sages, near-death experiencers, and quantum physicists all saying the same thing?
Yes, I think they are. But one is speaking in mathematics and the other is speaking in natural language. So it's difficult for the two to be kind of reconciled given the different ways in which language is used. But in my research and in my personal experience, I have seen this amazing congruence between physics in particular, science in general, and what saints, sages, and near-death experiencers have to say about their experience of reality.
Can you give us an example?
So I think the biggest connection between what I generally refer to as spirituality and physics can be found in the discipline of M theory. And M theory posits that everything in the physical universe, everything that we see with our senses, is actually being created from another reality. It's being created just as a holograph is created. Holographic projection is created from another source, if you will. And this other source, in terms of M theory's view of things, is a realm known generally as non-locality that is pure energy and two-dimensional. And if you look into the teachings of what I call experiential spirituality, you will see that most of them refer to a reality beyond the physical that is pure energy and which creates the physical universe. So the overlap between those two is so extraordinarily similar, and not the only example I could cite, but of the many, it really leads me to believe they're talking about the same reality. They've just gotten to it, one through experimentation and one through experience.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. You just jumbled my brain with that answer. So let's divide it up into chunks here so I can try and understand it better. what I heard you say, Joseph, was that what we're picturing in our current reality is a hologram of something that's being projected from a different reality. Did I hear that correctly?
You did.
Okay. So is that reality that's being projected? I would think it's subjective based on who the person is that's receiving that image in the form of a hologram.
Well, we all see the same hologram.
Okay.
I was standing side by side with you and I was pointing out things to you. You would agree that what I'm pointing out is the same thing you're experiencing, same thing you're seeing. So the holographic projection is objectively real. It's real to all five senses. We can touch it. We can taste, smell, see, and hear it. But if it weren't originating in this other dimension, if the energy and the sort of template, the information behind our physical universe, if that didn't exist, physical universe would simply disappear.
Okay, so you and I are in a botanical garden side by side, and I say, look at that oak tree. Isn't that fabulous? And we can go touch it, and we can see it, and we can smell it, and we can hear it when the breeze rustles the leaves and all of that. Where's that projection coming from? Where does it originate?
Well, this other realm that I've referred to, and that in physics is known as non-locality, in spiritual teachings it's known as the astral regions or the spirit worlds. And I think they are talking about the same reality because they describe it in similar fashions. Pure energy, or if you're describing it from the point of view of spiritual teachings, it's pure light. That the beings in that realm are light images where we get angels and where we have the kind of subtle experiences that are described by near-death experiencers. They all refer to it as a luminous reality. So physics refers to it as an energy-based reality. But they also say that the information, the template for it, which you can extend to this comparison to holography as the hologram. So even here on Earth, you can have a hologram and you shine laser light through it, and it creates a three-dimensional image that you can walk around. It's three-dimensional because it looks different on different sides, but it's being projected from a film that is two-dimensional. And that relationship is the same as the two-dimensional template that exists in this other reality that is projecting the entire physical universe as a three-dimensional experience that we can, walk, talk, and live in. So the parallels are very compelling when you dig into them. But that other reality, just to give you one more thing to unpack.
Because you haven't given me enough yet? Okay, keep going.
We exist in simultaneously. As I like to put it, we have one foot on earth and one foot in heaven, always. And so our particular physical body is holographically projected, but the information, the template, is our astral body. And without that astral body, the physical body ceases to exist.
I agree with that. because the astral body I call spirit. And when the spirit isn't connected to the body, as I perceive it, the body's inside the spirit. And when somebody dies and the body and the spirit separate, the body don't work anymore because the spirit is the power source for the body. So I get that part. When I'm doing a healing, I'm a medical intuitive and psychic medium I'm a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo. And I'm a buffet of psychicness, Joseph. Because once we connect with spirit, then we can do it all. So when I'm working with somebody on an energetic healing, I connect into them energetically, and I have a hologram of them in my mind's eye. Holography, that word you just used, that's a new vocabulary word for me, so I'm going to remember that. My fourth grade spelling bee teacher would be so proud that I'm still learning new vocabulary words. So I see a hologram of the person, and I'm like a human MRI. I can see inside their body telepathically in my mind's eye. So I can move that hologram around. I can look at different angles of organs. I can see broken bones. I can see torn ligaments, stuff like that. So it's interesting to me that you're talking about it's a two-dimensional projection that I'm able to see in 3D in my mind's eye, because I'm never with the person when I scan them. I mean, they could be in a galaxy far, far away and I can connect to them. It doesn't matter. But it's interesting to me when you're talking about the 2D thing, which I understand a hologram is a two-dimensional phenomenon. And is that correct?
Yes. So I would say, I obviously I'm not able to be inside your mind while you're having this experience, but I would say that you're viewing that person's subtle energy body as you might on a television screen.
Yeah.
So on a television screen, when people move, we see different sides of them.
Right.
But the image is still two-dimensional.
But I can see inside the organ too. So would that still be two-dimensional? Like I just scanned a client.
But I wouldn't get too hung up on the two-dimensional, three-dimensional thing. The key thing about what physics has to say about this pure energy realm is that there is no space and distance in it.
Right. I agree with that.
Therefore, there's no third dimension possible in it.
Yeah.
So I think when you're visioning it, I believe that when we're doing those kind of envisioning, whether it's of another person's body, as you're gifted to be able to do, or you're envisioning building something, or you're envisioning writing something, that it's your spirit-based, highly intelligent mind that you're doing it with. And so that highly intelligent mind is giving you the information that you need in whatever way is, most effective for you to be able to see it and understand it. But I think the image itself remains two-dimensional in its, physics properties.
Well, it goes along the lines, too, of I've heard many mystics and scholars and researchers and all of that say that this human reality is like a hologram in that it's a script. It's like we're playing a part in a movie or a play.
Yeah.
And that's our three-dimensional experience. But when we get into 5, 6, 27, and that's weeds to me too, like the 2D versus 3D. I don't want to get lost in the weeds. But I think of our 3D dimensional experience here on Earth as being more of a lower vibration than the higher vibrations that we can access. Is that a correct assumption? And does it matter? We're just able to access it? How does all that work?
Well, I have two answers to that. According to physics, it is literally a lower vibration. that the picture that M theory has of this super energy dense other dimension requires that all of the vibrations of light be at frequencies that are higher, which means therefore denser, which also means therefore more potent than the frequencies that manifest here in our physical universe. So literally, yes, the physical world is a lower vibration, is created out of lower vibrations of energy than what they describe as non-locality. But I think the other answer to that, which is what most of us who are versed in spiritual teachings take from that, is higher vibration is more subtle, but it's also closer to spirit. And it's more like spirit. So the physical world we're in is not only a lower vibration, literally, but it's also a lower vibration because it takes us farther from source, farther from the infinite spirit and consciousness that lies beyond and creates all of this.
Well, my understanding too is the body has mass, which would make it more dense than spirit, which is just pure energy. So when spirit's connected to a body, it vibrates more slowly simply because the body has mass. Does that make sense as well?
Yes. The thing with mass is that the famous Higgs boson, you familiar with that?
Yes, please tell everybody
a while
listening.
ago because it finally got proven to exist. And it was called by excited journalists the God particle because it got a lot of attention in newspapers and magazines and online. But it was a bit of a huge misnomer. Really what the Higgs boson, the discovery of the Higgs boson indicates is that mass is like, it was likened to running a fork through molasses. The molasses resists the fork, right? And so it gives the effect of it being heavy. So the Higgs boson actually creates a field, and when the energy in ordinary matter goes through it, it slows down. It's like that fork moving through molasses. And that is what mass is it's just energy being slowed down by other energies. So there really is no matter. There really is no mass as we know it. So the density is a human experience. We think it's dense because when we touch it, we can't do anything to it, right? But it never stops being pure energy in another form.
Okay. You say science has been hijacked by materialists. What do you mean by that?
Well, the predominant view of reality in our current society around the world is that matter is the only thing that exists. And it has become a belief of nearly everyone in the world that this is the case. But yet, that is a materialist's interpretation of the discoveries of science and physics. And there are other interpretations, which I've already been sharing with you, that get very little acceptance, particularly within the scientific world, but in the broader population as well, because the belief is strongly that this world is the only thing there is, matter is the only thing there is, and there is no possibility of more subtle reality. For example, consciousness. from the materialist point of view, consciousness is just impossible. Consciousness is a side effect of neurons firing in the brain and nothing more, and that it can't exist outside of your brain, and it can't exist after the body's gone because of that interpretation that matter is the only thing that is. So that view of things has hijacked science. It's very difficult as a scientist to put forward alternate theories of what consciousness could be, of how it would be possible that we might have subtle energy bodies. It gets shut down. There's no funding for it. There's no room in the scientific journals for it. And so the materialists own science. But it's not, and never has been, the only valid interpretation of scientific discovery.
When you think about the mystics, you mentioned Saint Teresa of Avila earlier. When you think of her and other mystics and other saints and sages, I'll use as an example, do you believe that they could experience with all of their senses different realities, and perhaps as we've become more well-educated, we've dumbed that down? Does that go along with what you were just mentioning about the materialists taking over science? Because it seems to me that certainly some of the things that I get to see in spirit form have been talked about for a long time in holy texts and other writings. And that's kind of how I think about it. I think when people were illiterate, they weren't bogged down by all this stuff that was somebody else's opinion that they had researched supposedly and written about. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I think it's a very good point. I think a lot of people dismiss the possibility of higher awareness, higher consciousness, psychic abilities out of hand because they think that science has already disproven that it can be possible. So anybody who makes any kind of claim around it must be a fraud or, trying to get money from gullible people. But it's long been the case, as you said, that there have been people alive, like yourself and many others, who see more subtle realities. And the saints are, in some ways, see it the most clearly. They don't necessarily use it with any particular purpose in mind. But I think when they see us, if we had the good fortune to be with a saint, they would see us simultaneously as physical beings and as energetic beings, and that they would have no confusion about seeing both at the same time. And that in the cases of what people often think of as being spiritually healed, I think they are healing the energetic body. And then because of that holographic relationship, as soon as the energy body is healed, the physical body reflects that, which is what you would find if you were using an actual terrestrial hologram. As soon as that terrestrial hologram is changed, the three-dimensional image it's projecting immediately reflects that change, right? So when Jesus and other masters and saints like Teresa heal people, I believe that they're seeing, as you do, the subtle body, but they have developed the ability to change that subtle body directly and thus to heal. But they don't really heal the atoms and molecules, so to speak. They don't go in like a surgeon and rearrange somebody's actual physical structure. they heal on a more subtle level, and as soon as that healing takes place, then it's expressed in the physical body.
Absolutely. That's my experience too, Joseph. I believe it's spirit working through me and with me to help that person heal themselves, because nobody heals anybody else. No doctor, no provider, no healer. We all heal ourselves. Yeah, I like to use the example of you go to the emergency room with a big cut in your leg and the doctor on call stitches up your wound. Well, that doctor doesn't make your skin grow back. You make your own skin grow back. And that's how all this works. A couple of points I want to back up for a second about saints and sages and people back, our ancestors, if they could perceive this spiritual stuff. When I was writing my book about what happens as we're transitioning from this life into the next, I was raised Roman Catholic, and at the end of every Catholic funeral is a prayer called In Paradisum, which is Latin for into paradise. And it says the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. And that's what I see, a series of events where the person's surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and spirits and all of that. And when I was writing the book, I did some research to see where that prayer originated and learned that it began as a 5th century Gregorian chant. And I thought, well, perhaps it took till the 5th century till someone was well educated enough that they could read and write down, what they were seeing that turned into a prayer. And certainly some of the most well-educated people back then were men living in monasteries and synagogues. Furthermore, when people are at the end of their lives, university-based research shows that 90% of people see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets in the last 6 months to 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 hours before they pass. And it's interesting to me that the number's that big, that it's 90% that has validated what I see energetically, I see telepathically. If you had a loved one who was getting ready to pass, I could tell you what the spirits looked like in the room. And you'd say, oh, that's my grandma, Susie, and that's my dog, Fluffy. And that's, with that kind of detail. So back to, again, I think it's interesting that people since the beginning of time have been able to see this. And as we've become more well-educated, we've lost sight of that, number one. And number two, that as we're getting ready to transition into pure spirit form, that it's like what you said earlier, we have a foot in this reality and we have a foot in the other spirit world reality. And most people think, oh, grandma's hallucinating. She's talking about seeing her father who's been dead for 60 years. Well, grandma's not hallucinating. Grandma's having a conversation with her father's spirit who's in the room with her. And research proves that. So what are your thoughts about that, if you have any?
Well, I think what you described is something I believe for half a dozen or 100 reasons. Near-death experiencers is one, because they often share that same kind of story, that when they leave their body behind for whatever reason, and they enter into the light, and then they go through the light into another reality, they're often greeted by people that they know. And it's interesting sometimes that it's a grandmother or it's a friend that they didn't realize had any particular high-mindedness while they were with them on Earth. And then they discover that, there had always been a more subtle connection between them. They see their families, they see their loved ones, and yes, of course, Fluffy. But it's such a universal experience. There are now known to be millions of people who have had near-death experiences. It's not 25 people who all wrote a book. There are millions of people who have had near-death experiences. And the way in which they describe them varies, but it varies in the same way that visiting a different country might vary. But they all describe going to another country, right? That they are literally elsewhere and that it's wonderful, it's full of light, it's full of joy, it's full of love. And then when they come back from that, the notion that they just had this weird hallucination is really, falsified by the fact that they come back changed. They come back deeply committed to living a more loving and thoughtful and spirit-centered life. And I have taken drugs and I have had hallucinogenic experiences, and I wasn't changed in that way or that profoundly. I don't think the two really add up. It has to be a deep, heartfelt experience. And then we have all the traditions of all the world's religions that there are heavens, that we are going to leave this body and enter our spirit body at some point. Technically, I think we're already in the spirit body, otherwise the physical body wouldn't work. But leaving this physical body means we're leaving our awareness of it and awakening into what has always already been there, which is our spirit body and beyond, our higher nature, our soul. But it's everywhere in religion. It's everywhere in near-death experiences. And there's enough foundation for it in physics, even though it's full of equations and it's hard, cold view of an energy world. It supports it enough for me to see that connection between what spiritual teachers are saying and what physics is saying.
We had Dr. Robin Ward on the show earlier this year, and she's a math professor at Rice University in Houston. And she was talking about how everything that exists has a mathematical equation to it. It's all math. And it reminds me of the movie Contact that I think was out in the 80s with Jodie Foster, and she was an astrophysicist. Did you see that? And I did too. And she talked about how, well, in the movie, spoiler alert, for those of you that haven't seen it, I think it's terrific. So go pull it up on Netflix or someplace. But she gets downloaded a mathematical equation, a schematic, if you will, for how to build a spaceship. And it's fascinating. So do you agree with Dr. Ward that everything is a mathematical equation of some type?
Well, I would flip it around and say that everything in creation has been intelligently ordered in order for it to exist. So if we were to, as an analogy, just take a bucket full of sand and toss it on a table, there would be no structure to it. We would have to intelligently order it to make some kind of form or shape out of that sand. And I think the entire cosmos, let alone the physical universe, cosmos including these astral regions and more, is intelligently shaped. So all that intelligence is reflected in behavior, and that behavior can be modeled mathematically. Now, even physicists themselves say that it's a miracle that they don't understand, that you can take mathematical equations in physics and do them in a new way that no one else has ever done before, and come to the conclusion that a property of matter must be X. And then years, decades, sometimes 100 years later, experiments prove that behavior, which was originally envisioned, if you will, by just pure mathematics. So this connection between math and reality goes deep into the nature of reality, I believe, and that there are probably higher levels of mathematics that apply to these astral realms that physicists on Earth aren't even dreaming of yet, but that the same math would eventually find those correlates in higher expression.
Okay, that whole math thing is way above my pay grade. So I appreciate people like you understanding it, because I'm like, "Wah!" With that, I excelled more in the language arts categories and left the mathematics to somebody else. So back to, you said that things are in perfect order, in an intelligent order. How did they get that way? Where'd they originate? Who did that? Or what did that?
I mean, you're leading me up to the inevitable one-word answer, which is God or spirit. I believe that we are expressions of spirit, and that our intelligence, our mind, our abilities all are God-given, and that what I have discovered thus far in this life, or many lives, is, just getting going, just getting into awareness of what is a infinitely intelligent being of which I am a part.
Okay. All right. I want to back up for a minute. I want to talk to you about consciousness and that kind of stuff in a second. But how'd you get into this? Were you kind of like a Carl Sagan kid, where you just looked around your life and thought, okay, how's this work? How's that work? What's your background? Give us an idea of the trajectory of your life that got you into all of this deep thinking and the combination of spirituality and science.
Well, the first part of it was that I was raised in a household where you could say science ruled. I often joke that dinner table conversations required references.
Oh.
That you couldn't just say, well, I heard that such and such is true. My father would always step in and say, well, where did you hear that, and who said it, and why do you believe it? So I was taught to be a critical thinker from that, and was sort of naturally drawn into science because my father was of a scientific mind, and so was the rest of my family. So when I went into college, I majored in molecular biology. But not long after diving into it, I had an aforementioned psychedelic experience that really made me more interested in what we might consider the soft sciences, the humanistic side of a university education. And so I switched majors, and that coincided with deeper experiences, spiritual experiences, that really firmly set me on a spiritual path. And I discovered the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, author of The Autobiography of a Yogi, and was very thrilled to discover that he used the Western scientific vernacular to describe spiritual experience. He didn't fill his book or that book or other books with lots of Sanskrit terms that I had no knowledge of. But he used the vernacular that a Westerner would understand to describe very subtle spiritual experience and very subtle spiritual truths. So I was very inspired to see that I didn't have to leave my critical thinking and scientific knowledge behind. I could bring them with me into a spiritual life. And it had always been kind of easy for me because I had that foundation in science to keep up with scientific breakthroughs in the last, 50 years since I was in college, and simultaneously to see how they were either supporting spiritual truths or They were just kind of fleshing out the scientific principles that are already understood. And increasingly, over the last 50 years, more and more of science has been opening this door that I was talking about to understanding that there are subtler realms beyond this one. And this is not just a bunch of fruitcakes who are talking about it, but that it really exists. So that inspiration, that life experience led me to eventually writing books like The Physics of God and The Physics of Miraculous Healing, because I could see how, and still see very much, how people are so influenced by science that they need to know that science can support a more subtle view of reality and not push it away because they just don't see how it could be possible from a scientific point of view.
Well, and sometimes science really challenges our common sense, meter in our bodies. We saw that with COVID. I mean, all the crazy stuff that they wanted us to do. And then we found out later, well, that 6-foot distance thing, they just pulled that out of the air. That wasn't based on anything, and other things along those lines. Back to the catalyst, it sounds like, that really got you interested in that there was another reality besides our human perspective. Was that part of an experiment for a class? Was it just a recreational situation? And can you tell us about what your experience was? Do you remember it?
I remember it vividly because it was life-changing. I'd had many hallucinogenic experiences before this one, and they were all recreational, and this was recreational as well. No control or oversight. But this one felt like a divine gift. It's the only way I can describe it, because in all my previous experiences, I liked them. I was drawn to them. And what you could perhaps say was common to them all was experiencing yourself more as an energy than as a physical being. It's not black and white, that you suddenly flip into pure energy awareness, but you experience yourself as far more than just physicality. So that commonality was across all those experiences. But this one in particular felt like a gift, because in it, I felt like I tapped into the person I was always meant to be. I tapped into feeling of peace, feeling of connection with other people that I had never had before. And the effect of it carried on for days and days and days. That once the actual trip was over, I still felt that deeper connection to other people. And I realized that what I had experienced was me, not the drug. And that the drug wasn't necessary to have that kind of experience. And that's really why I got interested in meditation and pranayama and other ways of tapping into that same experience, and gradually came to appreciate more and more that what I was experiencing was divine, and that it was indeed a divine gift for which I'm grateful to this day. So it was a very moving 12 hours, and I'll never forget it. And it really did change my life.
You were being led, you were being led through a somewhat circuitous route, but nevertheless, you were being led at that young age to certainly be on your path to explore this stuff all these decades later, and to be sharing all of this information with the world, which is remarkable. It's always fun to see if there is a catalyst, and usually there is a catalyst that leads us kind of in a different direction than what we had thought we were, or what we'd been planning, perhaps. It's always interesting, I think, to find that. You say that our thoughts, life force, emotions, and memories originate non-locally. Does that go back with what we're seeing and perceiving in our human reality? Does it come from the same different reality and comes into our heads? Say more about that.
Well, I think to explain what I mean by that, I need to sort of reinforce this notion that we always have one foot on earth and one foot in heaven. But what that might imply or might make someone envision is that there's this vast distance between the two realities. And that while we sort of have both facets of our being, that they are separate. But in reality, the energy body, which allows us to have our one foot in heaven, interpenetrates the physical body, which means most of what we experience in every moment is coming to us from the energy body, not the physical body. We experience things about the physical body through the senses. We experience tastes and smells and sights, etc. But all of those are, like different kinds of cameras viewing the world around us. But what we most experience as a result of those is whether we like those things, whether they make us happy or give us pleasure. And that emotional experience is in the energy body. And our thoughts originate from that energy body. The reason I believe this to be true it is described by different experiential spiritual traditions. But one of the reasons I believe it the most is when near-death experiencers describe their experiences, where there is no longer a physical body influencing them, they feel the same way they feel here. They think the same way they think here. They have memories that come right along with them of this life. All of those things, which I wager most people would consider to be the most precious parts of being alive, are all waiting for you after death because they're not originating in the physical body. It might affect the physical body. When you have an emotion, it might trigger endorphins or synapses to fire that affect the physical body. So they're not separate realities, but the physical body can't exist without the energy body, but the energy body can exist without the physical. And so it's in the energy body that our most precious, most meaningful aspects are now and always will be.
That makes sense to me, Joseph, because one of the things that I do in my buffet of psychicness is I do what's called past life scans. Doesn't involve hypnotism at all, but I envision myself in this hallway, like if I was going to do a Joseph past life scan. I'm in the Joseph hallway, and there are all these big 12-inch by 12-inch mirrors that are lined up perfectly vertically and horizontally in columns on the walls, very narrow walls, very tall ceiling. And we'll ask a question, and then the lifetimes that pertain to that question will come out. They'll be represented by those mirrors, and they'll come out from the wall as if they're on a hydraulic arm. And then I'll say, show me the one that correlates the most, and it'll come out the farthest. And then I'll envision walking into it, much like I'm walking into the scene of a movie. And I've been told by a spirit a bazillion times, telepathically, that every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all their lifetimes. And in order to get in touch with them, all we have to do is think of them, and that tunes our satellite dish head to their frequency. So when I go into these past lives, back to your point about that the memories exist in the other reality, in the ethers, if you will. Oh my God, it is so plain. It is just here's where it was, here's the time, here's what you were doing, here was your name. A lot of the time we can validate and corroborate the information we get from past life scans with historical documentation online. And that's really fun when that happens. But how else would we be able to access all those memories if they weren't stored in the ethereal body or in the ethers? So what you're saying makes total sense to me. I guess I just never unpacked it before. I just know it works because it's, I've experienced it so many times.
Well, there's a tendency to think we go somewhere and then we have a separate experience once we get to the heavens. But we can't have any experience without the energy body being active. So I'm thinking and sharing stories with you from memory, and I'm feeling, and I couldn't do that if I was just in a body of atoms and molecules. It can't do that as much as Western science would like to think it can. It really has to originate from higher mind, from this more subtle realm. But they're co-active while we're wandering around in our physical bodies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love when an NDE person who's been in a coma or died or whatever, and then they come back and they go, "Oh yeah, I heard you guys talking about the Rolling Stones, and I can't get none," or whatever one of their songs was playing in the hallway of the emergency room that they heard. And there's no way they could have known some of the things that they're telling the staff that was working on them because they were dead for 20 minutes. But they were saying, okay, I was floating at the top of the room and I watched the whole thing happen, and I could tell you who was in the room, and I could tell you what family members were ushered out of the room and where they were sitting, and they can corroborate all of that stuff with the information that the person who's had the NDE is talking about. What's the intelligent observer effect?
Well, this is a fun one. It takes a little bit to unpack, but basically many years ago, 100 years ago, physicists discovered that, one, everything is made of energy. So even matter is energy. You could say that matter is energy moving in a consistent and stable pattern, like a vortex. And that vortex of energy forms this kind of sphere, three-dimensional sphere in our three-dimensional space-time. But what physicists went on to discover is that energy can behave not only as matter, but the energy in matter can behave like waves of energy. This is called the wave-particle duality. And it's confounding to reason when you first get a grip on it. What it means is that there are times when, taking our bodies as examples, there's times when all the energy in my body, or most of the energy in my body, would be behaving like atoms and molecules. And there are times when most of that energy would be behaving as formless waves. So if we could peer into the interior of my physical body when, say, I'm asleep, we might find that it's all behaving like waves of energy. That you wouldn't see physical organs. You might see astral organs. You might see luminous body, but you wouldn't see physical expression. This is really hard to get the brain wrapped around. Now,
well, but brainwaves, certainly brainwaves. And I'm thinking of monitors when you're talking about waves. What's an EKG? It looks like a wave of the heartbeat. What's a sonogram? When a woman's in labor and they're monitoring the contractions, it goes in waves. All that stuff's all waves.
Yeah,
So
the energy not
yeah.
in the form, measurable energy not in the form of atoms and molecules always behaves like waves.
Yeah.
And so it can be measured and monitored. There's certain heights of frequency where no physical instrument can actually measure them, but those waves of energy don't necessarily stop. There are probably higher octaves of that energy existing in non-locality in other realms. But what you asked about was the observer paradox. And this is where it blows the mind and puts the weirdness into quantum weirdness, which is that what they discovered is that unless it's being measured or observed, energy will always behave like waves. So, in absolute terms, and this is weird, hard to grasp, but once I fall asleep and I'm no longer aware of and therefore observing my body and everything around me disappears. It behaves like waves of formless energy. Now, if you were to dash into my room and look at me quickly, I'd be behaving like physical atoms and molecules because you're my observer. So you can't catch it out. When I would tell people this, they would say, well, does that mean if I whip my head around in the room where I'm sitting that I might catch reality turning into matter? No, it happens so fast that it is imperceptible. But we create through consciousness matter by making energy behave like atoms and molecules.
So is that why when people are sleeping, that's when they astral travel? Because they've turned into waves, and then that energy, they can go in different places because they don't have the physicality of the body. They're just waves of energy. Is that connected with astral travel?
I think so. I believe so.
I do too.
It's also, I believe, a reason why we tend to heal more when we sleep, because the body is less material and more energetic, and therefore able to make more rapid changes than it might if it were only able to behave as the sort of mechanical atoms and molecules that Western medicine thinks is always the case. And it's also a time, according to spiritual teachers like Yogananda, when our spine, our chakras get recharged. And that's why we need to sleep. We need to sleep so that our inner reservoirs of subtle energy get replenished. And then we can go about using that energy the next day. That it's not all, the energy we use, the life force we use, is not all chemical energy generated by eating food or being in the sunshine. That we are, because we're multiple dimensional beings, we also have sources of energy that aren't on the physical.
I agree with that. And it's been my experience too, Joseph, that when we sleep, we not only do our brains rest, but we go back to the factory preset frequency of spirit. And that's why it's so much easier oftentimes when somebody loses a loved one, let's say a child, and they're in such deep grief that they can't get any signs or communicate with that spirit. And so I always suggest, well, ask them to come visit you in your dreams. And inevitably, that spirit will come visit that person because their brain's not busy while they're asleep. I mean, it's not as busy as it is when we're awake, but also that we go back to the factory preset frequency, which is easier for spirit to communicate on that frequency. I always say that spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low. And it's amazing how because I work with a lot of people who've lost a loved one, and I always say, they'll say, my mom hasn't visited me, or my daughter, or whomever, my dog, I can't get in touch with my dog's spirit. I'll say, well, ask them to come visit you in your dreams. And then they'll email me later and they'll say, oh my goodness. Yeah, but it felt so real. And the colors were super vivid. And it was like it was in high def. And I said, well, that wasn't a dream. That was a visit.
Right.
But they can communicate with them because their brain or their spirit has gone back to the high vibrational level. I think that's fascinating.
And they're also not preoccupied with their senses.
Correct. Yeah.
So they can perceive through more subtle means more naturally.
Yeah, I agree. Great point. Does everybody have the ability to create miracles?
Well, yes. But perhaps not in the way that most people would think. I believe that this holographic relationship where the energy body is the template that holographically projects our physical body is a continuous miracle. Because without that energy body, physical body can't exist. And we don't experience it in the way we think a miracle is experienced, which means sudden, rapid change, because our energy body is very stable. But if you can affect your own energy body to undergo rapid change, or you can have a healer like yourself affect some rapid change in my physical body, in my energy body, then the result is immediate and miraculous, because science can't explain such major changes. And one of the kind of objective facts to back this up is in the world of multiple personality disorder. So there are many people who are suffering, and it really is a condition that you don't want. They're suffering from being fractured into multiple personalities, and they move into one personality and out, and each personality has a distinct personality. They also have distinct memories, which is kind of fascinating. They can know languages that other personalities don't know, and they have a temperament that is unique to them. But what's less known is that they also have different physiological characteristics. So one of my favorite examples is a woman who I believe may still be alive, living in Germany, who came to a therapist with 10 personalities, and all of them were blind. She had never seen at any time in her life. But through therapy, one by one, 9 out of 10 of those personalities began to be able to see to some degree, some better than others. But one of them, we'll call this personality 1, remained blind. Now, personalities come and go within seconds to minutes. So what this means is that when personality 1's convictions come into that physical body, personality 1's memories, beliefs about themselves, she's blind. So I believe that she literally changes her energy body to reflect that blindness. And she's not blind like a child, might close their eyes and say, oh, I'm blind, I'm blind. They do what's called a visual evoked potential experiment with her. They put on the EEG and shine a really bright light in her eyes. And there is no neural response at all anywhere in her brain, especially in the visual cortex at the back of her brain. So she is blind. Now, minutes later, if any of her other personalities 2 through 10 come in, she can see to varying degrees, which means instantaneous, for all intents and purposes, instantaneous changes have taken place inside her brain. So you could say each one of those 10 personalities is working a miracle. They unwork the miracle and they go back to being blind, but they go back and forth. So we work that miracle, but it's a steady miracle. But what that opens the door to us to be able to do is realize that we don't have to rely on the medical model where you take a medicine, it affects your molecules in your body, the molecules in your body rebuild or change or support some other physical part of your body. That changes that could potentially be done by medicines could also be done by changing your belief in your own state. And changes that medicine can't do can be affected by changing your belief because it changes your subtle energy body.
Well, and to your point there, two things come to mind. Number one, I've read about the multiple personalities too, and oftentimes they have different blood sugar levels and blood type and stuff like that, like regular tests that are done as far as their, some have high blood pressure, some have diabetes. It's pretty wild. I think it's fascinating. The other thing too is that the old-fashioned placebo effect is alive and well. Every pharmaceutical, before it's approved by whatever that country's governing body is to sell, they have to do clinical studies. And the placebo effect always outperforms the efficacy of the drug every time. Where somebody's taking a sugar pill and they think it's this new wonder drug and it's going to help them get well. It's that belief thing again.
Yeah. And the beliefs come in a package. One of my favorite examples of the placebo is a drug trial done by the British Cancer Society for a gastric cancer condition. And they were trialing a chemotherapy drug. And 30% of the placebo group, the group that was just getting saline fluid probably, lost all their hair.
Yeah, I know.
So our beliefs are enormously powerful.
Yeah. Dr. Mark Hyman says the most powerful pharmacy on the planet is in our head. It's our mind. Yeah, which I think is a profound statement. Couple more questions as we're winding down here. You say you're a polymath. What's a polymath?
A polymath is just someone who has a very broad range of knowledge in different areas. And there's no magic number of how many different areas or the depth in particular of knowledge in those areas. But I've always been able to do a deep dive into different disciplines, scientific disciplines, spiritual disciplines, and quickly get an understanding of its kind of internal rules and structure. And because I do it in a wide variety, I'm able to see connections that perhaps are missed by others or in a in medicine, in physics, in most scientific disciplines, the people who learn their areas are very siloed, and they don't really know at all what's happening in another discipline that, if they did, might make, the light bulbs go off that, hey, there's a connection here. So I love to find those connections by going deep enough into these fields to find them.
Well, I say that about the woo-woo space. You got the pet psychics and the medical intuitives, and you got the people that can talk to dead people, and you got the past life people. And it's like you connect with spirit. You can do it all. I don't understand why it's siloed. So that's why I talk about the buffet of psychicness, because it's all the same thing. You just maneuver, once you get into that frequency with spirit, you take it anywhere you want. You talk about how meditation is so important to you and also helpful in developing your superconscious awareness. Talk to us about that. Why is it so helpful?
Well, in every book and on every program like yours, I'm asked, what would you recommend people do? And it's always meditation. And the reason why I unhesitatingly recommend it to people is that it's just a means of discovering who you really are. And that we tend to get into habits of perception, habits of behavior that keep us from discovering more subtle things about ourselves. And often people will discover more subtle things about themselves through profound personal experiences, and they do happen. But you don't need to have had such an experience. You can methodically and habitually learn to quiet your physical body, make it so it sits more still, calm the mind, and experience spirit. Experience calmness, experience love, experience a sense of your self, all of which together you can think of as a state of super consciousness, an awareness that is beyond what our everyday conscious mind is like, which is generally putting together all the sensory input that we're dealing with and turning it into a picture of reality in our mind's eye. That's conscious reality. And as long as we're in conscious reality, it's difficult to perceive this greater reality beyond it, this super conscious reality beyond it. But meditation is, was invented, if you will. It was developed by saints and sages who say, if you want to experience more of who you really are and have this wonderful, blissful connection to spirit, meditate. It's a scientific approach, if you will, to having these kind of experiences, because we're all made the same way. We're just, most people are stuck in their senses as a way of perceiving things, but you don't have to be stuck in them. You can get beyond them. I mean, you have a gift that allows you to just sit, be quiet, and boom, you're not in your senses anymore. You're in a deeper state of consciousness. I would imagine that you probably just fall into what I would call meditation naturally without necessarily using a technique. You might have a technique for all I know. But for people who don't, I really recommend finding a good technique, using a methodical way to go deep. I offer one in The Physics of God and in all my other books. It's always in the back, in the index, but it's the Hung Saw technique. It's a very effective way of calming the mind, stilling the body, and then just having this amazing connection, blissful, joyful connection to spirit.
I meditate every morning. And I also, when I'm working with somebody, I turn my abilities on and off, and it's a nanosecond. It's like you get in the car and you drive. you don't have to think about it just because I've been doing it for so long that it's just second nature. But it's a skill that we all have the ability to do. It's a matter of practice. The more you do it, the easier it is. And then it just becomes second nature, like anything else. I'd like to use the example of everybody can throw a football, but it doesn't mean you're going to be a star quarterback without lots of practice. And it's the same thing with everything. Last question, why do we incarnate?
Well, we're drawn to this world because we have kind of want to finish things. Do you ever watch movies or read books and you're not really enjoying it, but you stick with it because you want to know how it comes out? I think that's what pulls us back for incarnation after incarnation. We have another book that we experience. We're the characters in the book, and sometimes that experience comes out well and sometimes it doesn't. But gradually, over many, many incarnations, we learn that what we're really seeking, that the happy ending that we're really hoping to have in any one of those lives, or any chapter in any one of those lives, is right within us. But it takes a long time for us to be convinced that everything we want, everything we need, is right in our own hearts and minds.
Big statement. Wow. What a fascinating deep thinker you are, sir. Holy Moses. My goodness. Wow. And we just scratched on the surface of all of the revelations that you've come up with in this lifetime anyways, probably in many lifetimes that preceded this one. And you're just building on all of that would be my guess.
I'd like to think so.
How can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, you can go to my website, which is josephselbie.com. And Selbie is spelled somewhat unusually. It's Selbie rather than Selby. So Joseph Selbie with an IE.com. You can find out all about my books. You can read first chapters of all my books. You can read articles that I've posted there. There are courses that I have taught that you might be interested in. And it's all there, point of departure for many other things.
Okay, terrific. And we'll, of course, put that in the show notes. All righty, everybody, we've given you a lot of information to chew on here with our conversation today. So in the meantime, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama, mwah! And from California, too, where Joseph is. We'll see you next time. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.